Hello and welcome to Open Mind UFO Radio. This is your host, Alejandro Rojas, and I am joined by nobody. Martin's not here today because he's going to be pretty busy, but that's all right. We've got a lot of news to go through, so I don't know if we're going to even have time for Martin and my witty banter, so we'll just get right into it. But you're listening to Open Mind UFO Radio, where we cover credible UFO news and information in a journalistic way. So it's not necessarily that we're coming to conclusions, but we're sharing substantiated, credible information so you can make your own decision. So we'll be looking also at the news stories that happened this week, and there has been a lot of them, like I mentioned, so we'll go over those. And then after that, for those of you who are just here for the interview, we usually start that off at about the 26-minute mark, and our interview today is with Danny Silva. So this is great. Danny Silva is running a website called The Silva Record, and he's a little bit new to the scene. So he started this blog. He's been posting some great stuff about To the Stars and this Pentagon UFO program that has been in the news so much. So we'll talk to Danny about what inspired him to do this, to put up this website, and some of the stories that he's ran across. But before that, let's get to the news. So lots of news out there. The very first one is my story, and I'm very proud of it. So many of you will know that on the website Den of Geek, which is kind of a sci-fi news site, that I've been reviewing the television show Project Blue Book from the History Channel. Of course, some of you have been very frustrated with the show that it has not stuck to the facts of, what really happened in the real Project Blue Book. However, it is inspired by it, as they say, and hopefully, and I think it has, gotten people to realize that there was a Project Blue Book and that it wasn't as cut and dry as people thought, that there was really a Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who is a star in the show, but, someone that's supposed to kind of represent him. But the real Dr. Hynek really did feel he was a skeptic and then eventually became a believer when it came to UFOs. So the other thing that is great about the show that is a big positive is that not only is each show about a real UFO event, throughout each show, there are kind of these nods or Easter eggs that hint at other real cases. So really, if you're in the know, there's an abundance of information out here. And what's been great for me is when I write these reviews, I can call these out and tell people about these cases and then link to them. But what we did here, I wasn't able to review every episode. So we put together this gigantic guide to the entire first season. So not only do I have links and information to the real Blue Book files for each of the cases that they covered on each of these episodes, but I also have links and information about all of the little Easter eggs in there. So some of these, are some really fun and compelling stories that weren't featured in the show, but are something that are still really cool to look into. Some of the cases I can think of off the top of my head are, the mythology of the Philadelphia experiment, what the Nazis really worked on in the past as far as advanced technology. We have the Lubbock Lights. Well, that was in the story, but the details, for instance, behind this project, the Lubbock Lights, is pretty extraordinary. And the green fireballs, there's actually a big story about scientists and their UFO sightings behind that. So there's a lot of background information here that is a lot of fun that they alluded to. And we know we've had David O'Leary on the show that, he's a UFO buff himself. So they jam-packed this full of these little Easter eggs. And you can read this on my latest Den of Geek article. And I do want to remind people, if you go to openminds.tv on the front page, you'll see the UFO headlines right up front there. And the ones that I'm referring to are the ones at the top right there right now. I also put a link in the show notes to the UFO headlines. So if we're talking about past headlines, you can see that. But the page, the UFO headlines page, is really cool. It's a great resource where you can look at, UFO headlines in the mainstream media going back for years. So, yes, check out this story. I'm very, very proud of it. A lot of great information. And for me, the net, when it comes to the show, and I know some of you disagree, but I think it was a net positive. I think that it did bring more awareness to this topic, and it was a fun show. I just love Aidan Gillen, who plays J. Allen Hynek, and the other characters that are in the show. So I think it was a fun show. I like the show. I'm looking forward to a second season. And especially all this UFO stuff is a lot of fun, so check it out. Moving on, the Metro in the UK has a story that just posted today, and this is an interview with Nick Pope. Nick Pope, of course, ran the MOD's UFO desk for a short period of time. Now, we've talked a lot about lately this Pentagon project looking into UFOs that was headed by Luis Elizondo. In ways, what Nick Pope did was similar because he did look into UFO cases and was a government employee, but they didn't do real hardcore investigations like ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program of the Pentagon. Instead, it was very more light touching on things. But Nick Pope has been a UFO researcher ever since, because much like J. Allen Hynek, he entered as skeptic, but by the time he left, he thought, wow, there really is something to all of this. Well, he pipes in on this story about ATIP. The title is Top Secret Government Investigation Probed Health Effects of UFO Encounters. So we do know some of the things that they worked on inside of this program. Not a lot, but some. One of the documents, or at least headlines in the documents that came out, was related to human effects. Well, Nick is saying he knows a little bit about what they looked into, and this quote in particular is interesting. I believe this was done, and what he means by this is collecting of blood and DNA samples from encounter witnesses. He says, I believe this was done in a way that disguised the fact that this was for a U.S. intelligence program, with witnesses being told that they were participating in a scientific or academic study. So that's kind of interesting. He's alleging that, there were misrepresenting themselves when they collected this material. Now, we don't know where he gets this information from or why he believes this. In fact, the person I'm interviewing today, this story just came out today after I interviewed Danny, but Danny asked via Twitter, and then we've done so again on Facebook, what substantiates those claims? Why do you think this? So hopefully we'll hear more from Nick about that. I'm sure I'll have some more information about that by next week. So yeah, interesting piece of news there. Newsweek. Newsweek covered a really interesting article, Russia's paranormal soldiers and military dolphin telepathy revealed by Defense Ministry magazine. What? So what this is all about is that there was a piece in a magazine called Army Collection, which is a credible Russia Defense Ministry magazine. The title of this article was Super Soldier for the Wars of the Future. Bum, bum, bum. This is similar, actually, to a book that John Alexander wrote in the past, because John Alexander, who we've interviewed on the show many times in Army Intelligence, worked on similar sort of things. And one of the stories that John Alexander and some of the others, including some of the people involved with To the Stars Academy, where Luz Elizondo is now working, the gentleman who worked on ATIP, he works with the scientist Hal Puthoff, who used to work with remote viewing programs, which is essentially a psychic program inside of our government. That ended years ago. Some suspect that it's continuing on just more secretly, but they were inspired to begin their program because they heard the Russians were working on this sort of thing. So it's got an incredibly interesting history. In fact, there is a new documentary out called Third Eye Spies. That's what it's called. Third Eye Spies. Really great documentary. The content is amazing following these programs. So check that out. Third Eye Spies. Anyway, getting back to the story, that's what this story is about. So I'd recommend you take a look. How does it work into UFOs and ETs? Well, what's interesting is that many of the remote viewers in the past believed they had remote viewed aliens. In fact, I touch on that in my story in the Project Blue Book thing. And they believe that they whenever they remote viewed UFOs, they saw aliens and stuff like that. So many of these guys believe in aliens. Jim Mars, unfortunately, he's passed away, but he has a book called Psychic Spies where he refers to this. Or actually, it's called Sci Spies, where he refers to, all of these beliefs from these people. So really interesting stuff there. The Sun, another UK tabloid, has a story. TV producer sues CIA scientist in bid to expose government UFO cover-up and blows whistle on mysterious anti-gravity research project. So this is about Robert Kiviat. Many of the UFO shows that you want to see on television have been produced by Robert Kiviat. I know this gentleman well. I've talked to him on a regular basis. He's calling. He's so interested in all of these stories. In fact, this story was written by Emma Perry. She's written a couple of stories on me. But anyway, he is suing a gentleman called Ron Pandolfi, who's worked with the CIA on their alleged what is called Weird Desk. Now, it's kind of not an official title, but a title a couple of people who've worked in the CIA gave to these cold cases that were strange. But Robert Kiviat apparently was working with this guy on a project and a program on reverse technology, on anti-gravity research. And Kiviat's disappointed. He says that, he got kind of screwed out of some money, so he's suing these guys over this whole thing. He says he also wants to expose that the CIA has been manipulating information related to the UFO phenomena. So really interesting. In fact, maybe we'll try to get Robert on. Now, Robert's the kind of guy you can't get off the phone with him, without talking to him for an hour, because he just talks and talks and talks and talks. So it'll be difficult when we interview him. I'm sure he'll just keep going on and on and on. But it'll be great to get from him, I guess, from his mouth, what he's talking about here. So I'll work on getting an interview with Robert. But until then, you'll be able to check out this story in the Sun. Also, in Florida, story in the Miami Herald. What if you were abducted by aliens? This Florida insurance company has you covered. So this is an insurance company that covers people who believe they've been abducted by aliens. You can get alien abduction insurance. And apparently they have paid out at least once or twice on this. So interesting. A couple things that they have on here that they've covered, I guess. They've covered Taylor Swift's legs and Jennifer Lopez's butt, allegedly. So, of course, those are very high dollar, important body parts that are culturally significant. So there's big dollar signs attached to those. Not literally, I don't know. There may be some tattoos there that we're not aware of. But so they are covering alien abduction. So you can read more about that in the Miami Herald. Also, a story coming from KMTV News in Omaha. UFO story revitalized after beer comic book comes out. So this gentleman essentially wanted to write a comic book about UFOs. He looked into stories in Nebraska, and he found this gentleman, Herbert Schirmer, who believed he had been abducted. He felt this was a very credible story, so he created a comic book about this story. The Miami Herald also interviewed, the KMTV also interviewed some local UFO researchers who talked about how credible this case is. So very interesting. All these people involved believe there was something to it. Also, a new beer came out this week called Star Space Dank IPA that is related to these UFO researchers and UFO research in Nebraska. So that's what that's all about. I also included a link to the Omaha World Herald, which also has a story called A Nebraska Cop's Alleged UFO Encounter Lives On, thanks to a graphic novel and a beer. So this story has a little bit more information and some more pictures on that same story. So I included two links to that story so you could get all the news that's out there on that one. Moving on, bizarre West Auckland UFO sighting terrifies couple. So this is an interesting sighting about these people in New Zealand. So they say that they were on the beach when they saw strange lights in the sky. They said it was the craziest experiences that they've ever had. They posted their sighting on Reddit. Their tagline, I guess their handle was UFO Mystery 123, but they said that they saw these bright orange red lights at the far end of the beach. This was apparently written by a female. It says, "My boyfriend and I guess I shouldn't assume the gender, but my boyfriend and I saw two bright orange red lights far on the other end of the beach. In a matter of seconds, one of the lights started moving at full speed in a straight line, no more than 200 meters above the water, until it was directly in front of us. The UFO had changed from having a red light to a bright white light, somewhat like a torch shining directly at us. After 2 minutes, the strange object moved away, flying incredibly fast and with perfect precision until it disappeared. But this wasn't the end. We were lying down looking at the stars for a while and then stood up to leave before realizing there were 5 of these things surrounding them in different areas on the beach. One of them was flying up and down and another from side to side. The others were just still switching between red and white spotlights. This was when we decided to leave, scared S-less. The poopless. They were scared poopless, the other word for poopless. They fled the beach but couldn't escape the lights, is what they said. So they freaked out and they took off. And so a really interesting sighting here that got into the news. People are saying they could have been Chinese lanterns, or they could have been this or that. So who knows? You know what this reminds me of too, and I wish that I would have linked to it, but I'll try to do that in the show notes. Or I know if you look at the Open Mind UFO News. By the way, we do have a Facebook group. It's a closed group called Open Mind UFO News. It's closed. The only reason it's closed is so we can kick out the trollers, so the people that are being mean. Of course, we have a rule that debate is very much welcome. People can debate all they want, but they have to be civil with each other, not be mean. Like, the internet is so full of just extremely cruel and vile people. Well, that's not the type of people we want in this forum, and we have a lot of really great people who are willing to not get personal when we're debating things or talking about people. So that's why the group is closed. But if you want to be part of the group, just go to Facebook, go to the Open Mind UFO News group, ask to join, and usually within 24 hours we'll get to you, sometimes really soon, and approve you, and you'll be able to get in there and read all the stories. So I post all of these stories. Others post stories in there. There's a lot of conversation that goes back and forth in there. But the reason I'm referring to it is someone had posted a story recently about some of the sightings that had occurred by Navy personnel. So if you remember last week, we talked about the History Channel show. There's going to be a History Channel show about To the Stars Academy, ran by Tom DeLonge, and of course all these intelligence and these former important people. Danny and I are going to be talking about this in just a minute in the interview, are part of this program. But we don't know much about what Lou Elizondo researched regarding UFOs in ATIP. So this new History Channel series that's coming out in just a couple months is going to be going over some of those stories. Because according to Lou Elizondo, and he told us this even just a couple weeks ago in Alabama, and he told me it was cool to share this, that, this show is going to include a lot of these cases that we haven't heard yet that were military cases, including more Tic Tac cases. I'm assuming the Tic Tac cases, to be honest. I don't know that we heard that specifically, but other cases, including a case where there were allegedly observed several square objects that seemed to have kind of a round aura around them, and they moved in strange ways. And the reason I bring this up is because these objects that they described seeing is kind of similar to this New Zealand sighting. And somebody recently made a video that kind of shows what that sighting looked like. And that's posted in the Open Mind UFO News group, so you can see it there. However, this sighting in New Zealand Also could have been a group of drones. I mean, it doesn't say they heard anything, but I think we need more information to definitely rule out the drone possibility. You never know. Like, I've got one of these little drones, the Spark, and it's freaking awesome. It flies so fast, bzz, 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 all over the place, and it has a HD camera on it. I love this thing, but no doubt if I flew that around on the beach, which I have, not at night, but if I were to fly it around on the beach at night, it probably would look like a UFO. I have flown around in parks and stuff at night, and it looks really weird, and it zooms, man. It goes really close. And at night, it's hard to tell how far something is from you. So if something's close and it's moving very fast, then and you assume that it's far, of course, then it's going to give you the perception that it's moving much faster than it actually is. So that's what's up with that. Next story, a website called 24/7 Wall Street. So, of course, mostly they're covering news and tech and things that affect, the economy. However, they have a story in here called States with the Most UFO Sightings, and they have a list of different UFO sightings. They write a little bit about UFOs at the beginning of this story, and then they get right into it. And essentially, it's very long. They cover pretty much every state, and they talk about, what are the states with the biggest sighting. They talk about their methodology to putting this list together and where they're referencing this information. They're referencing a book by Cheryl Costa. So, of course, we've had her on the show. She actually won the Researcher of the Year award at the International UFO Congress for this book. But the book is called The UFO Sightings Desk Reference, United States of America, 2001 to 2015, Unidentified Flying Objects, Frequency, Distributions, and Shapes. So it's a great book. If you don't have it, I would highly recommend it. And she did a great job reaching out to the media and getting a lot of attention for this book. So here's still another example, even though the book's been out almost a couple of years now, at least over a year, and still getting media attention. So she actually already does this. She already has her own list of the top sightings. So they must have talked to her and gotten this information from her. But they list the states with the most UFO sightings. So that's really interesting story there. And then let's see what else we got. The Guardian. So this is another UK paper, but actually it's not a tabloid. It's funny because we hear so much from the UK tabloids because they're so popular, and it seems we hear little from the more credible news sources like the BBC or this one, The Guardian. And of course, they don't really cover some hard UFO stuff sometimes, but not often. This story is called From UFO Cults to Nietzsche, John Gray Picks the Best Books on Atheism and Faith. And one of the books that they're referring to, this is why we're talking UFOs, is called When Prophecy Fails. And they're kind of an examination of this UFO cult. And I don't personally like to use that word much. Cult, it has a negative connotation, and sometimes, it's warranted, but sometimes it's not. I mean, a religion is, to one person, just like to anybody else, as long as it's not a bad thing. But this was a group that predicted the end of the world, and were wrong. And of course, this happens a lot. In fact, I think we get a lot of people predicting the end of UFO secrecy, and they're always wrong. But anyway, they review this cult and kind of like, how did people deal with that? They were, they believed in this group, and then they didn't come through. How do people deal? How do they lose faith? That sort of thing. So one of the 5 books is UFOs. And then finally, there's a story in My SA, which is a San Antonio news site that says creepy, scary UFO sightings reported in Texas in 2019. So they go over a few Texas. They have a slideshow here of 35 different stories. They really don't provide a lot of information. They got these stories from the National UFO Reporting Center. But yeah, a little bit about some sightings from 2019 in the My SA there. So that's the last link. So those are all of the links to the news stories. So do check those out at openminds.tv. You'll see them on the front page. And I also link to them in the show notes, no matter where you're listening, whether that's a podcast or from my blog, or from Open Minds TV, or let's see, where else did I post it? YouTube. So, this podcast is all over the place. wherever you'll see the link to the headlines, and you'll be able to get links to all of these stories. So check them out. But that's it for the news. So let's take a quick break. If you're listening on the radio, you'll hear a commercial. Otherwise, you'll hear a short musical interlude. And then we'll be back with Danny Silva of the Silva Record. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Open Mind UFO Radio. I'm your host, Alejandro Rojas, and I am very excited for the next guest, Danny Silva. It's his first time on the show. Hello, Danny.
Hello, Alejandro. I'm so happy to be. I've always been an example of a class act. Someone that everyone else can look up to in the field, and you handle yourself exactly how we try to handle ourselves. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much for saying that. That's very flattering. I'm going to tear up a little bit here. No, but thank you very much. And I'm excited to have you on because it's kind of neat. I mean, really, it's you and, Joe, UFO Joe, have kind of come out of the woodwork, and you've been inspired to create these blogs and cover some of what's been going on lately. So I wanted to ask you, what inspired you first to get into this field and then to actually get involved and get the blog up. So let's tackle the first one first. What inspired you to get into the whole interested in UFOs in the first place?
I'm not sure originally. It was just really interesting to me. Growing up as a kid in the 90s, and it was just something that was really amazing to me. And then I started listening to Art Bell, and then George Norrie, George Knapp, just religiously. But then, obviously, what happened was the December 17, the article happened, and I just kind of had to reevaluate everything. I wasn't sure, about everything, and I believed it, but it was a whole new world that happened after that Times article, and To the Stars and all that kind of thing. It was cool because I had heard about that story from Art Bell. He had posted it somewhere on social media, so I thought that was kind of fitting. And but since then, it's just I've been locked in, and I can't watch a movie or do anything else without feel like I'm wasting time. And there's just so much to take in, and I was already into it before then, but then just after that, it was just a whole different me. And then I jumped on social media, and I was just kind of tweeting about it and things like that. People started asking me my opinion. And then I had some friends who wanted to start a blog, and I'm not a writer or a journalist, and they kind of talked me into it, and at first I wasn't even using my real name, and they convinced me to use my real name, and now I'm kind of a public person with it, and but now I am writing, and now I would be considered maybe an amateur journalist or doing some of those sort of things that I never thought I would be doing, but I just kind of got thrown into it, and now I'm here.
Mm-hmm. So now you're screwed because it sounds like you've got the bug like me. That's what happened to me, a couple decades or something ago. Just this compulsion, like you said, where you're always thinking about it, and you've got to get into it no matter what you can do. And then I haven't been able to kick that feeling for ever. So look forward to years and years of it.
Yeah, really. And it's not that I won't, ever do anything else, but it's so important, and you hear people, saying how important it is, like Tom DeLonge, and they call it, like the greatest story ever, or something along those lines, and I kind of agree, and it affects all of us. People act like it doesn't, but it really does affect everything, and I don't know what else we could be doing to be changing the world and getting to the bottom of some of these big questions.
Mm-hmm. Now, your blog, what inspired you to do a blog? I mean, did you see that there was kind of a gap of information, or what really inspired you? What did you think, hey, here's something that I can do that others aren't doing?
Well, basically, like I was saying, that people were asking me to. I never thought I would have. And then once I kind of started doing it, I kind of changed my mindset, but also because I wanted to know what the latest things were happening. I was so addicted to finding out what was going on, and I wanted to have a place where other people can go on the internet to see some of this stuff. And it's so quick moving and fast paced that it changes all the time. And consistently I'm talking to people in my normal everyday life, and they can't keep up with it. And they're not obsessed. They got their lives and to take care of. So I'm just kind of trying to have a place on the internet where people can just click on it and kind of find out what the latest thing is going on without sifting through all this information. And then I really just got hooked on reporting stories and coming up with some of my own stories even. But generally I was just trying to inform people. And by doing that, it also gives me access to find out more information for myself.
Well, you've been doing a good job with that. And that's kind of why I asked the question in that way, where you are, I think, filling a gap, which is wonderful. Because, I mean, so many of us, well, here's what I see as happening. And here's why now I get to tell you why I think you're so important and what you're doing is so great. Is that there was really kind of this, I think when that story, New York Times story came out, there's this really delineation between those who report the information that's out there and then those that speculate. And really, it became apparent that the large percentage of people covering this sort of stuff on a regular basis wanted to do a lot of speculation. So, of course, you've got great stories from George Knapp, but very few others are just kind of sticking to the facts. There are some. But what's great about you popping up here is that you're able to cover stories that other people aren't covering. I mean, has there been a time where you kind of posted something and you felt great? You're like, nobody else has done this, so I've kind of got a scoop here.
Yeah, I feel like I've had a bunch of scoops, and I kind of get fed up with some of the speculation also, and I'm not knocking anyone for doing it. And it has a big place. But me personally, I try not to, and maybe that is me falling back into more of an amateur journalist or whatever you would call it. I'm trying. If you notice in my blogs, I'm trying to use a lot of quotes. And I go by what other people are saying. I'm trying not to come up with a lot of opinions on my own. I mean, I do have some, and I insert them in places, but it's just not my thing. My thing is more so reporting on these other important people because, I'm trying to track them down. I do what a lot of other prominent ufologists do, and they have a list of people and they watch them. Grant Cameron originally talks about this a lot, and he just has his list and he watches people and he listens to what they're saying. He watches all their interviews. I'm trying to reach out to as many people as possible and talk to them myself, and then I just kind of report on that, and I just try to quote them because they know what's going on at the end of the day. I'm trying to find out what's going on, but I'm not, inside in a lot of these places, and I wasn't a member of ATIP for darn sure, so I'm trying to quote Lou Elizondo and other To the Stars members and George Knapp and people with access because they know what's going on, and I'm trying to just put it together concisely for other people to follow.
And because of course I am a journalist, I love that. That's why I'm such a big fan of George Knapp, sticking to the facts. And that's what's wonderful about what you're doing, which seems to come natural to you. Because even when I'm writing a story, I may think, or when I start to investigate, I'm like, I know what I'm going to find. I'm going to find this or that. But so many times you find out, no, I'm completely wrong. The answer once I ask the questions or find the documents or read the stories are different than I ever could have imagined. So that's what's great about, I think, the way you're doing what you're doing. And then it's also a better resource for people like me because you're referencing, credible information.
Yeah, and some of these blogs, they may look like, I put them together quickly, but it takes a lot of time to sift through the interviews, find the right quotes. Some of these I'll be literally compiling information for months before I put it out. So I have like a list of things right now that I'm working on at all times, and I'm compiling quotes and info and tidbits. And I get some good tips also from people. I get a lot of crazy stuff also in my inbox that I just can't report on, or that I'm not interested in reporting on. But I'm blessed to have other people that I can call upon, like my friend Giuliano Marinkovic. He is great, and he has so much information. He's like an archivist, basically. So I can ask him if I need something, and I have all these other people like James Iandoli and other friends of mine, Twitter user Jay, and they just help me out. And I think we're all making waves now, or at least we're helping. I think that's what we're trying to do, is help. We're not trying to tear anyone else down, and we're trying to move this thing forward and support people that we think are really making a difference, whether that's to the Stars Academy or yourself or Dr. Diana Posoka, or people like that are just really, I think, changing everything right now.
Mm-hmm. So let's get into some of your stories, because what's great about a lot of the headlines that you're using, they're short and simple, and they're to the point that you're making. For instance, ATIP did not end is one of your stories. And just for those people out there who might be new to the show, ATIP is this kind of Pentagon program that we just found out about December 2017 through the New York Times. Luckily, I had a little insight into that, but that's the story you were talking about that really got you into it. But a lot of the media, because in that original story, the DOD said the funding had ended, and they were under the impression that the program had ended, but it hasn't ended. At least we've heard from several insiders, right, that the program's still continuing.
Right. Lou said that from the beginning, ever since the New York Times story. And I understand why it's hard for some of these media outlets, because they'll read maybe a piece of the New York Times article, or they're not soaking it in, or they're not eating it and sleeping it like we are every day. But they'll end up quoting one part of the story, like the Pentagon spokespeople or whatever it was who said it ended. Then they're not reading the next paragraph where Lou says it doesn't end. They're not listening to these other numerous interviews with Lou saying it didn't end, or other people like George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell saying it didn't end. And and a lot of it is really confusing. There is still pieces of it that I'm confused about, like the OSAP, ATIP, how they basically, I feel like they morphed into, OSAP may have like ended, but then also morphed into ATIP, but that's very confusing stuff. It's real technical. Mm-hmm. But yeah, ATIP didn't end. There's been multiple statements now. Elizondo did say at the SCU conference that he basically hinted that it may not have the same name, so it may not be called ATIP, but there's still this program that kind of compiles military sightings or data and puts it in one place. And I mean, let's be honest, I don't think anyone has ever believed that there wasn't a government UFO program going on. So basically throughout time. So just the fact that, there would still be one going on still, it makes sense.
Mm-hmm. It does make a lot of sense. And of course, we've heard from people like Paul Dean in Australia. I've had him on the show, and people could look up his website. And he has been really following that thread and those documents. What's interesting, too, with Paul Dean is that he has discovered there have been departments that are been getting some files on UFO reports, even though they claim, they're not looking into it. And he seemed to also indicate that what you just referred to, that these programs change their names periodically. And I had forgotten about Lou saying that in Alabama, that, it might not be called ATIP anymore, which I think is the first time he said that, and which is kind of a clue for us that, I think this is the way they keep people from finding them, because all of us are putting these FOIAs out there for ATIP, and we're not going to get any of this new stuff because that's not their name.
Yeah, and Paul Dean basically broke the OSEP story, which was huge.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I've found that every once in a while I'll write a blog, and it'll be kind of like a breaking story or new info. Then I'll have all these people like privately message me, "Hey, I wasn't allowed to talk about this. Now that you wrote about it, it's in the public realm, and I can talk about it." So that's basically what seemed like happened with when Paul Dean came out with the OSEP thing, and then since then we've had a flood of information about it. And we've had the DIRD list come out from George Mapp and all this other stuff. So Paul did an amazing service by coming out with the OSAP stuff for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as soon as he did that, and it's funny because I really feel like it inspired it. Then George came out with a bunch of leaked documents about OSAP, and for those of you who aren't aware, who might be new to this, also, there's so many acronyms, and you can correct me. What that was, the Advanced Aerospace Weapon System Application Program.
Yeah.
And it essentially was the first program which got the original funding, which, so the New York Times was a little off on that the program was actually called OSAP at the time. And then that's the program that essentially these religious factions in the government closed down. And we learned that from George Knapp, but then Lou has confirmed that and written about that since. But like you just said, that transition period of is OSAP ATIP? Is ATIP just another name for OSAP? Are these different programs? How did that, transition happen? We don't have those answers, and we have, and John Greenwald, someone who's pointed this out, conflicting information from the people involved on all of that. But so that's kind of a gray area still.
Yeah, and some of the information I feel that's conflicting from the To the Stars members or people that were involved with ATIP, to me, it isn't super big deals. It's little things. I think the big contradictions probably came from the Pentagon spokespersons. And they've proven over and over again that we can't necessarily believe what they're saying. This isn't exclusive to the UFO field. That there's spokespeople that make these statements and they end up not being accurate, and it's not just with UFOs, it's with a lot of different things in politics and the government, and I'm not sure who ends up being held accountable for that. It's almost like they can blast off these statements and then there's like no repercussions if they're incorrect. But especially with Lou consistently highlighting that a lot of this stuff is FOIA exempt, and the FOIAs are important, but at the same time, that can't be our sole source of information. So I'm not knocking anyone for doing that, but we need to listen to the actual people that were involved in the programs themselves.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think one thing that gets lost with people a little bit is that, for instance, we didn't hear about OSAP from Lou, who of course ran ATIP, until the information was made public. And he said that a few times. So these DIRDs, which are these reports that were these written for the OSAP program by physicists and other, researchers, those he couldn't talk about either until that came out as well. And he said over and over again, not only is some of it not cleared to be shared, but some of it belongs to departments which he are still his colleagues and friends, and he's not going to step on their toes and release anything that they wouldn't want him to release, even if he could technically do it. So it's got to come from someone else, and luckily George Knapp is getting material straight from Washington, as he's written about, and which is sharing a lot of this. So, and I will say, I've been doing some real big digging. So I do have on the horizon some more information about those questions, about ATIP and OSAP, and how that all happened, coming forth here soon. But again, it is kind of getting into the weeds because the big stuff, we have these other people talking about.
Yeah. One thing that was another contradiction was in the letter to John McCain and his committee, they asked for, what was it, all products produced by ATIP, and they were sent the 38 DIRDs. Well, we know from hearing George Knapp and Harry Reid that that is inaccurate, that the DIRDs were just the icing on the cake for as far as OSAP went. Another thing that's seemingly being misreported, and I don't blame them because I kind of just figured this out last night. I think now I can say this and be more confident about it, but the New York Times reported that the 22 million was for ATIP, and then so we've been wondering, and then we heard that it was for OSAP. So we've been wondering, was there another 22 million for ATIP? But after listening to George Knapp's interview last night on Spaced Out Radio, it sounds like definitely the 22 million was for OSAP. There was no 22 million for ATIP. Mm-hmm. So this stuff is just becoming more clear and clear, and sometimes it's taking 15 interviews to really get that.
Right. Exactly, and fortunately I've had the chance to talk to Lou, but it's when you ask a set of questions, that just, of course, creates more questions. And so it's this back and forth for many, many times. And sometimes we don't have access to these people except for on occasion. So it takes time to collect this information. And it takes time for them to get in front of an interviewer who is savvy enough to ask the good questions.
Yeah, no doubt. And we love these interviews, and I think they're going to be probably doing a lot more probably around the TV show or after it. But that's another thing I try to do is I just sift through these interviews and I listen to them over and over and over again. And it's funny, Lou or someone else, they'll say something and people kind of pass it over, and then months later I'll highlight that quote from them, and it's like a whole new story all over again because people passed over that quote and they didn't have it in context. Mm-hmm. So I think that's something I'm able to do with the website, put these quotes together that people are passing over or they just don't understand at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the other hard part is getting into the weeds. You mentioned this a bit too, and I think you're right, is that a lot of it is so complicated. I had John Alexander on not too long ago, and he talked about how complicated and just almost, to the point of being silly that the bureaucracy and the structures are when it comes to the government. So I don't think we're ever going to find out the minutia that a lot of people are scrambling for, what department was this in, who did this person report to, blah, blah, blah. We're probably never going to get that stuff because it's just, there's secrecy and there's probably very few people who understand. So I think some of these discrepancies really, and I don't think we can really personally beat them up too much about this, is they just don't know. They're taking their best guess. I think Lou probably knows the best. He was an administrator, but the other guys are just, well, here's what I think it is. And, little do they know people are going to hold them to it and, go crazy if they're off a bit.
Not every DIRD author, which was the Defense Intelligence Reference Documents. I've spoken to some of those scientists and authors. Not all of them, just a couple of them. But a lot of them didn't know what was 100% going on. They were doing their research and submitting it, and they didn't have access and clues into OSAP or BASS or any of these people. And I can't speak for all of them. That's just a couple. But I found that interesting. They were kind of doing their thing, and they didn't have this big time access.
That is another awesome piece of information. That is a really, really good point also. And we only have a minute, so maybe we'll just start into this just for a second. But here's another story that you're covering that I don't think anybody else has, that we'll talk more about this after the break. But you wrote about how To the Stars has a new advisor, Chris Herndon.
Right, yeah. Tom DeLonge announced that on Instagram, and we don't know a whole lot about him. He's made some comments on Twitter, and I think one or two people have been able to contact him. But basically, he's this White House guy, and to me, it sounds like he's going to be another link for To the Stars and DC. So wow. That's valuable.
Mm-hmm. That's really exciting. So we'll talk a little bit more about that once we come out of the break. But just to remind people some more here, because we've introduced now another acronym. To the Stars, or TTSA, is the group ran by rock star Tom DeLonge with a lot of officials that now that Lou Elizondo has left the DOD and the Pentagon, he is now working with Tom DeLonge and these gentlemen at To the Stars, and they're all very high level, including apparently this gentleman Chris Herndon, who just joined the team. So we'll get into that after the break. We got to take a quick break here. If you're listening on a radio station, then you'll hear a commercial. For the rest of you, you'll hear a short musical interlude, and then we'll be right back with Mr. Danny Silva. Welcome back to Open Mind UFO Radio. This is your host, Alejandro Rojas, and we are with Danny Silva of the Silva Record. I've referred to his blog several times in the last few weeks, so you got to check out silvarecord.com, and I'm very excited to have him here. And you're covering and you're looking at stuff the others of us are either missing or just don't have time to look at, and one of those we were just talking about is this new member of To the Stars, Chris Herndon. And is there anything else more you could tell us about him?
I don't know a whole lot about it. I did a blog called UFO Databases, and this is me speculating. I noticed that he had all this tech background and security background, technology security background with the White House. So I just kind of speculated maybe he's helping out with some of this UFO database stuff. I really have no idea. That could be 100% wrong.
You know what? It's good speculation in that, that's what Lou was supposed to do originally. But of course, as we've seen, his kind of role seems to have expanded to kind of like he said, Alabama, begrudgingly being forced into being a spokesperson. But also he's out there leading a lot of the investigations, apparently. So it would make sense that they would need more help to help Lou out with that security, digital security type of area.
Yeah, and the databases themselves are just like this huge story. I mean, it's basically, when you say database, you basically are meaning everything that ATIP came up with or everything OSAP came up with. I mean, it's somewhere. Everything Bass came up with, or other private individuals like Robert Bigelow. So it basically means we want to see the fruits of their labor, and it's somewhere. It's in these probably highly secure computers somewhere, and To the Stars is now talking about making one called Vault. So that'll just be huge, and if there's public access to it, it could be a massive game changer. Mm-hmm.
So another piece of information. Oh, and getting back to that really quickly is that, some people have kind of criticized MUFON for working with To the Stars, but this is an example where it's a great thing if they're working with To the Stars, because then they can help each other with these databases, which has always been a struggle for MUFON.
Yeah, I think MUFON has the numbers. I don't get too far into a lot of the MUFON stories. I know some people over there, but I'm not super versed on it. But I was excited to hear that interview with Jan Harzan and Lou on Coast to Coast with George Knapp last year. That was cool. So I think anyone that they can get kind of on their side, especially a giant organization with all these people, is going to help them. Mm-hmm.
So here's another great story that you've got that I don't see a lot of other people paying attention to. Another one I'd love to get to at, but for me, it's great because then I can use your stuff as a reference. But the Navy UFO event took place off the coast of Florida and Virginia. So, yeah, this is not getting a lot of news yet. I think it will. I think it'll be part of the History Channel show, or at least some release of information in the future is what I hear. But tell us about that.
Everyone, ever since the gimbal video was released, it shocked everybody. And a lot of people confuse it with the Tic Tac Nimitz video. The Tic Tac one didn't have audio. The gimbal video had the audio where they said it was rotating. I also did a story about how maybe that rotation could match up with some of the stuff Bob Lazar is talking about, or other people. I think that rotation is very important for the propulsion, possibly at least. But and then there's all these other rumors circulating. Another researcher I look up to, Keith Basterfield, he heard that from his sources that there's at least 5 gimbal videos. I think that that's probably accurate, that there's a bunch of different ones. One of them is probably Go Fast. It was probably from the same event.
But just for people, the New York Times story, they released 2 videos, but To the Stars has released 3 overall. That is a Tic Tac video from the Nimitz, the gimbal video you're referring to, which we don't have a lot of information about, the other 2, and then there's one called Go Fast, which we also don't have a whole lot of information about.
Yeah, and since then, everyone has been trying to track it down, figure out what's going on with it. A lot of information was released about the Nimitz, but the gimbal has been a lot more mysterious. My friend Dave Beatty, who did the Nimitz encounters, he's been getting with a lot of military witnesses. They're trying to track down people that were involved with the gimbal. They think it might have been involved with the USS Roosevelt. And basically, we've heard that it was off the East Coast. That's all we knew. Then we started to hear it was off of, possibly off of Florida. We didn't know that. And then I was listening to an interview that George Knapp was conducting. It was like 3 a.m. I was half asleep, and then I heard him say Virginia, and that was totally new information as far as I was concerned. So I jumped on the computer and started typing it up, and didn't sleep at all that night. But so that was new. And since he said Virginia, Eric Davis has also said Virginia to Erica Lukes during their interview. Mm-hmm. Dr. Eric Davis, who's a legend. And another thing Dr. Eric Davis said about the gimbal that, as far as I'm concerned, I think was all new information, was that there was Tic Tacs involved, because in the gimbal video, it looks like a saucer. David Fravor and Jeremy Corbell have also talked about these squares inside circles, mm-hmm. or a square inside of a aura, like a circular aura, and they refer to them as scouts. So we knew that shape was there. We knew probably the saucer shape was there from the gimbal video that was rotating. The Go Fast video, you can't really make out a shape very well. And now Eric Davis has also said there's Tic Tacs. So this gimbal thing is amazing. Luce has said there's a fleet. Also, the pilot speaking says, look on the ASA, there's a whole fleet of them. So this has potential to be equally or more important than the Nimitz encounter. Right. I just keep asking myself, how many more of these is it going to take? Because the Nimitz encounter was amazing and it changed everything. But at the same time, the general public has kind of been sleeping on it. Like, it kind of went away. We haven't been. We've been talking about it every day to death. But, it hit the news and it kind of went away. But how many more of these is it going to take? And this may be one of the biggest ones ever. And, there may be links with water. I've been following that story as far as oceans and things like that. But this gimbal story is going to be huge. And there's been rumors consistently that witnesses will be coming out kind of similar to the Nimitz. And I only can hope that happens. And I hope we get more information, maybe some of the other videos during the To the Stars show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we will. I mean, Lou has said, and I hope this was public, and I'm pretty sure he's definitely said that there will be more cases released, including in the History Channel show, some of them better than Nimitz, which, of course, like you said, really puts us back in our seat, because Nimitz is extraordinary. But to have cases that are better is like, wow. And like you said, some incidents that include multiple objects. So, and this is what's really great about you guys people paying attention to everything people are saying, because now we have more information that, this could be off of Florida or Virginia, or at least these incidents have occurred in those areas. And if they're mentioning them, it's likely that there is some pretty good documentation that also supports those cases.
Right. And, just hearing the pilots talk and seeing the video, you would think people would be more amazed by it, and then people are still trying to say it's a bird or whatever they're saying, or it's a smudge on the screen, and it's crazy. So I think when the show comes out and we get some of this extra data like we got with the Nimitz, it's going to smack some people in the face that haven't believed these things are real.
I think you're right, because the other thing that we have not gotten is who has analyzed the videos. Who inside of the military, whether that be at the DOD or, someone at the Pentagon, Lou was able to get to look at it, or someone inside the Navy, we don't know, or the Marines, because some of these were spotted by Marines. We don't know. And it changes from I'm a video analyst at that point to now I have to critique the investigation that was done that I can't even see yet by the Navy or someone. I mean, you have to now, because you're talking about someone who has expertise that are really beyond yours, you have to counter what they have discovered. And we don't even have the information to go there yet. So I agree with you that it's a little premature. It's worth looking at, but to be definitive is, I feel like you, premature.
One thing I noticed that was really interesting to me, and it took me listening to an Eric Davis interview with George Knapp. I must have listened to it 15, 20 times. Mm-hmm. And I was going back recently listening to it, and he said that there was 36 investigations into the Nimitz.
Wow.
At first, I was thinking, was he confusing it with the 38 DIRDs? But no, he wasn't. He was talking about the 36 investigations just into the Nimitz alone. So it sounds like when these things are happening, we do hear that maybe they're just getting put in a drawer and forgotten about, and that may be happening also. But it does sound like there's a lot of resources going into these investigations and analyzing what's happening.
Mm-hmm. And they seem to be widely known. Robert Powell tells a story about when he finally got to talk to someone, about getting some information about the Tic Tac. He mentioned the word Tic Tac, and the guy was like, "Oh, the Tic Tacs? I know what you're talking about." A guy in the Navy, just some random dude. And he was aware of these Tic Tac UFO sightings.
Yeah. I only can imagine what else is going to come out about this. Eric Davis also said that there was Tic Tac, events. I think one interview he said Middle East, another interview he said Asia. But I mean, these Tic Tacs are probably getting seen all over the world. And the shapes alone of these craft, the differences in the shapes is just extremely amazing. Lou at one point said that people in the know probably thought that the different shapes were because of different functions of the craft. But I think once some of that comes out, or I hope it does, it's going to be a really, really big deal.
Mm-hmm. That's so cool. So you had mentioned also, because a lot of these are over the ocean, these cases that we're talking about. And so your latest blog is UFOs in water, which are also called USOs, unidentified submerged objects. So what was kind of the stuff you wanted to share in that blog?
Basically, I've heard these comments. I heard Lou in Italy, and one of the questions from the crowd, they said, what, I don't remember exactly how the question was stated, but, what were some of the trends? And he said nuclear and water, but not necessarily together. We've seen the documentary. Most people have, I don't remember what it's called now, Nukes and,
Robert Hastings, UFOs and Nukes?
UFO, that's right. And, there was the book written, UFOs and Water, a while ago. But this seems like a really, really big deal. And then, the Nimitz was over water. All these other encounters were over water. I don't know if we can just speculate basically why that could be. We don't know. There was the Aguadilla, I think I'm pronouncing that right, in Puerto Rico. And, if that thing is real, then that's as important as maybe the Nimitz and gimbal. I would love to see someone really confirm that 100% as real from the government. The SCU did a great job with their report on it, and they definitely think it's real. But it would be great if it was also just kind of confirmed by Lou or someone else. Maybe they didn't take a look at it, I don't know, or maybe it's classified and sensitive. But it just seems like over and over again these water instances are popping up. And then what really did it was Tom DeLonge's Instagram post. He said, I got it right here, who here wants to meet up and talk about how a few years ago an unidentified craft was underwater and pinned against the North Atlantic coast by multiple nuclear attack submarines for over a week? So when he has a lot of hot takes on his social media, but when he said that, we all freaked out. I only can hope that that's going to be included into the show. If they can approve that, or just talk about that, I think it's going to be a big deal. I mean, we know about UFOs in water, in the air, and obviously people think about them in space, but now if people start thinking about them in the water, it's just going to be more fuel on the fire. To get more people interested.
What's exciting about all of this too, especially like with all the things that you're mentioning, all of these things that we're talking about are the situation's so fluid. So we're receiving little bits of information on a regular basis, really, about all of this, and we know that large amounts of information are forthcoming, especially when it comes to the History Channel show. So all of this is unraveling, and that's what's really exciting. That's why I think that there's no need to be impatient. That if you're paying attention, there's a lot going on, and again, that's another great service that your blog serves. Is that if other people aren't catching it, like me or others, George, or when we're not doing anything, you're doing stuff and you're sharing more information, that tidbits that get out, and others, of course, Giuliano is great. He's following all of these interviews and everything. UFO Joe, who we're actually going to have on the show next week, is transcribing a lot of this stuff in these interviews. So there's some people have said, oh, we're not finding out anything out. It's so boring. And it's like, are you kidding? There's tons of information coming out.
There's stuff everywhere. It does kind of feel like we're calm before the storm as far as with the show. We've all been kind of foaming at the mouth because we heard these rumors that there was going to be a March announcement or an April announcement, and it just really seems like everything is riding on the show now. Not that there's massive amounts of pressure, which I think there probably is, but I'm confident that they're going to deliver. This really seems like it, and it's only going to be 6 episodes. I don't know how they're going to pack everything into the 6, yeah. But maybe also the show will be the jumping off point. And, there's so much stuff going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. I only focus on public comments. And I only can imagine or speculate on what's happening behind the scenes with the government, with some of these briefings, with these closed door talks about trying to get people to come forward. George Knapp yesterday said that maybe one day a more prominent politician than Harry Reid would come out and talk about it, because right now Harry Reid seems to have been the biggest ever, in my mind at least. But I only can imagine what would happen if someone else came out. We always have rumors about other politicians being involved, but that might be a huge deal. Or what if someone came out and said that they were an experiencer that was in a high position? I mean, I think it would change everything. Someone that everyone trusts, that you can't just kind of like shake off as being a crazy person. If they came out and said that they were an experiencer, I think that would change a lot. And a lot of people have said that they've seen craft that were famous, but I think if someone really came out and said they were a legit experiencer, it would change a lot of things too. Mm-hmm.
So another story, we only have a few minutes left, but you had mentioned Diana Pasulka, and she wrote this book recently, American Cosmic UFOs, Religion, and Technology. And she shows up in your article about the metamaterials, which is another thing that we're going to learn more about, another whole area of all of this that is really exciting. And maybe we'll just do another show where we can talk about some of that stuff. But how does she fit in?
Well, Dr. Pasulka was taken to a crash site from the 40s. She has extremely high connections, and she was able to go there with a scientist, and they found some pieces. There's but basically she was given impeccable access to write her book, and her book to me changes a lot of things if you read it and also read between the lines. I can't stress that enough. There's stories of scientists in her book doing current work on some of these metamaterials. They don't think they were made in this universe. They look like, she describes them as frog skin, at least one of them. And just the simple fact that she was able to go there and get shown this stuff makes me wonder just exactly what's going on. A lot of people think of To the Stars Academy as the main group, and they totally are. But there is other people doing all this kind of amazing stuff, and there's other work being done with metamaterials. So I think if it's going to be coming from more than one place, it's even better to convince the skeptics. And the more scientists that are involved, the better. And I think that's also one of the goals of To the Stars Academy, is to get politicians to start talking about this and get the scientific community to start talking about this, when previously they thought that, they weren't allowed to, or it was silly, or they would get in trouble if they did it. And once it's okay for everyone to start talking about this, it's going to be a game changer. And I think that's already happening from To the Stars and from Diana Pasulka and other people like that.
I agree with you 100% that we see this happening, and there's no doubt about it. And that's what's great. And maybe that's what some people are concerned about, is that the conversation is now reaching another level. And you have these credible scientists, and retired officials and so forth now getting involved, politicians, and they're worried about getting left behind. But, your blog is a demonstration of just someone having an interest, being able to get involved, and then also being able to get in touch with all of these people and get their cooperation to help you to share more information.
Yeah, I'm amazed that how welcoming a lot of people are. People will talk to you every once in a while at least, and they'll answer your emails every once in a while. I get ghosted like a lot of other people do when I send out emails and I don't hear back. But at the same time, there's a lot of people that will talk to you, and I just kind of I feel like everyone should be getting involved, no matter what they're doing, whether they're telling their family, or they're jumping on social media, or they're writing a blog, or whatever they're doing. As long as they're doing it credibly and they're citing their sources and things like that, I think there's a lot of grassroots involvement that people can be doing. I can't wait to see what this TV show does, because if the New York Times article did something and got all of us involved, this TV show is going to do it, and it's just going to get waves of more people involved in talking about this.
Right, exactly. So the last thing, because we're pretty much out of time, but I do, on that last topic we were talking about, the metamaterials, and you were talking about others, getting involved in having materials like Diana. Another name that you have in your blog story is, of course, Jacques Vallée, who's been in this field for decades, one of the godfathers of the field. And he's also, behind the scenes dropping clues here and there.
Yeah, I mean, Vallée, you have to read all of his stuff. It's a must, and they have a bunch of these pieces. Dr. Putoff said at his SSE talk, a lot of this stuff is classified and they can't talk about it, but there's also a lot in the public realm. And that's what it seems like Jacques Vallée has with the scientists he's working with. He's working with Dr. Gary Nolan as well. And what they're doing is going to be incredible. And I think they'll hopefully come out with some of their things. Hopefully To the Stars will, and various other people. So, like I said, this metamaterial results, if we're getting everyone on board with it, it's going to be a game changer. And I'm sure people that don't believe it, they still won't. But people that are more open-minded, they're going to be able to see some of this, these scientific results, and just get on board and freak out, basically, about it.
Mm-hmm. Exciting stuff. So the time absolutely flew by. Thank you so much for being on. silvarecord.com is where you guys can go and look at this. Can you give us any sneak peek into something that's coming up next that you're working on?
Let's see. Probably not, actually. I don't think I should, because it may get me into some trouble. But I'm hoping to have a video, not an exclusive video, but a video from an experiencer that this experiencer thinks is credible, and I'm hoping to highlight that. That I can say. So I'm working on that one.
Okay.
And, yeah.
That's
and if anyone
good.
has stories, hit me with them and send them to me, and I'll look into it.
Sounds good. Thanks for the little clue there. But, there's that whole other article you have on experiencers, and I did want to get into that, but we just didn't have time, but we'll have to hit on that another time. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you, Alejandro. You're a real role model for all of us. So thank you for what you do, and you get the best podcast going.
Thank you so much for saying that. That's very, very appreciated. Thank you so much to Danny for being on the show. Be sure to check out his website, silvarecord.com. That's silvarecord.com for all of those stories that he talked about. Much more on those underwater objects and TTSA and a whole bunch of other stuff that he's written about. So check it out. We only touched on the surface. And of course, there'll be much more that we'll review over time. But another place that we're all on quite a bit is Twitter. I know some of you don't get on Twitter, but, the way I use it, the best way is kind of as a news feed. So you go follow the people that you like, make a list where they're all in there, and then you get to see and keep updated on all of this information, and it's to the second or to the minute. So that's why I love Twitter, and we're on there quite a bit. Another person who's on Twitter is UFO Joe. Some of you may know him. He's another guy just like Mike, who we had on last week, and Danny, who we had on this week. UFO Joe is also following all of this on a regular basis. Just like Danny, he's transcribing different interviews. He's sharing stories that some of us are missing. Really great stuff. So we'll have him on next week. So very exciting. Kind of all these new guys coming out and sharing information and paying attention to all of this exciting news that is coming out about UFOs and the government and everything. So it's an exciting time. There's another story too I forgot to write about or tell you all about. I wrote a story and I posted it on my Patreon about the Condon Report. So some of you may know that Project Blue Book ended in 1969, and the reason they say they closed it is because of the Condon Report. In fact, if you go to the National Archives, that's what it'll say. We closed Blue Book because of Condon. So a lot of people feel like, and the Air Force tries to make it seem as though, the Condon Report was the end-all be-all. They took a scientific look at the topic and it was done. They figured, hey, there's not much to this. We don't have to waste our time with it. But that's not how the Condon Report actually ended. There were lots of doubts by people inside, by their colleagues outside. And so I wrote an article about this. And the reason why is that there was an article fairly recently about the Scientific Coalition for Ufology event a couple weeks ago in Alabama. And this author took that kind of angle. He was like, why are we wasting our time on this? We keep wasting our time on this. This was all figured out years ago. Well, no, it actually wasn't necessarily figured out years ago. And if we have an unidentified, object, aircraft in our airspace, certainly that's something that we're going to want to investigate until we figure out what it is. And what Lou Elizondo and all these guys are saying, that they have investigated them and they can't figure out what they are. And that's why there's a mystery and something to look into. So definitely check out that story. It's on my Patreon. If you go to Patreon and push Alejandro T. Rojas, you'll find it. But you also will find links to it on Open Minds on my blog, alejandrotrojas.com, or in the show notes below, depending on the tool that you're looking at. And then I'm also going to have links to that from Open Minds and from everywhere else. So you'll be able to check that out. But that's kind of a fun story that I would love for you to see. And it's really helpful. So if people say, hey, didn't they figure figure that out, back in 1969? Well, not necessarily, and here's why. And these sources that I give you are all credible sources, scientific organizations or people inside of the Condon Report themselves. So this is all credible stuff, not just some random UFO dude saying, hey, that's a bunch of crap. So check that out. Otherwise, go to the UFOcongress.com if you want to get on our email list. Our Open Minds email is we're not able to send out mass emails currently through Open Minds, so we're sending those out through the UFO Congress, just so you know. So if you get a UFO Congress email, that's also Open Mind News, so don't delete it, and please don't mark it as spam. Even if you don't want to get those emails anymore, just unsubscribe, and you won't get them anymore, but please do not send it to spam. That actually hurts us quite a bit. So be sure to do that, and we'll have more information about the Congress coming out soon. And all of you that are really interested in these topics that we've been talking about these last few weeks, you're going to be very excited when our lineup comes out for the Congress. I know we're a little late on posting that information, but there has been some stuff that's delayed us. We're going to have like a better ticketing system and some other stuff that is taking more work than expected. But we'll have that information out very soon, and it's going to excite you all, and you're going to love it. So pay attention to that. And then also we have, of course, like I've talked about, all these cool UFO products and stuff like that you'll find at the UFO Congress store. So there is everything. I want to thank Danny for being on the show. I want to thank Caleb Hanks for the opening and close music. I want to thank Systematics for the bumper music. And of course, I want to thank you for listening. Until next time, adios, muchachos.